The great spire of Velanthar loomed like a blade piercing the clouds, the Galactic Council seated in a circular chamber of crystalline glass and gold, suspended above the capital city of Elion Prime. The chamber's walls shimmered with starlight, pulled from live feeds across hundreds of systems. Every species of the Council, Oran mind speakers, Juskari flame-born, Kinth organic AIs, and others, gathered in solemn silence. In the center stood the accused, humans. Ambassador Rhea Malik, wrapped in Earth's final ambassadorial crest, stood defiant, her eyes locked with the presiding Kinth speaker, a being of glistening synth flesh and slow-blinking optics. "You sentenced us before we even spoke," Rhea said, her voice calm but raw with anger. The Kinth's voice came like a hum behind metal. "Humanity is unstable. In less than 3 centuries, you triggered 3 extinction-grade wars. You tampered with void tech, violated sealed protocols, and weaponized dark matter anomalies. Your exile is not punishment. It is preservation." Another counselor, an Oran whose features seemed to ripple like thoughts made flesh, added softly, "We offer you a world on the galactic edge. 1,000 of your kind. You will live, but far from us." Rhea turned, scanning the silent watchers beyond the transparent walls, the entire galaxy, watching Earth's last diplomats like zoo specimens. "You're not exiling us to live. You're burying us." No one spoke. Behind her, the other human delegate stood pale and stone-faced. A sentence had already been signed, etched in the void logs. The exile protocol had begun. On the transport ship Peregrine's Fall, the humans were loaded like cargo. Only scientists, engineers, thinkers, builders, and their children. All chosen not to fight, but to preserve. Rhea remained among them, not as a politician, but as witness. The journey to the edge took decades, passing dead stars and forgotten systems. Eventually, the nav systems blinked red. Destination reached, Hades' Rim, uncharted. A blue world below, covered in violent storms and cracked continents, awaited them. From the command deck, Rhea stared at the planet as the ship began descent. "We were never meant to survive this," she whispered. The ship shuddered as atmospheric flames licked the hull. The AI announced entry with mechanical indifference, but no one screamed, no one prayed. In the silence, humanity prepared for what came next. The world they called Nyx was silent. Its skies shimmered with veils of radiation, painting the horizon in ghostly greens and blues. Frozen storms raged across jagged terrain, ice cracked in deep, endless echoes, and winds carried the weight of abandonment. The exile ship, now half buried under centuries of accumulated frost, stood like a monument to a forgotten crime. The first years had been chaos. The atmosphere was thin, the temperature murderous. Crops failed, shelters collapsed, and the sickness, oh, the sickness, took so many. Infants never took their first breaths. Adults, hardened soldiers, and engineers wept in silence as they watched their comrades die beneath alien stars. But they didn't die off, not all of them. They adapted. Underground, beneath layers of frozen bedrock, they built what the Council never thought possible. Heat was drawn from deep geothermal vents. Food was synthesized from algae and lab-grown proteins. Oxygen was extracted and filtered. Machines were repurposed, broken down, rebuilt again, smarter, leaner. Humanity folded into the ice itself, carved out a life in Nyx's bones. Rhea Malik remembered the sound of her father's voice, low, hoarse, nearly robotic from breath filtration implants. "This world doesn't want us, so we'll take it." Now, centuries later, their descendants walk through titanium corridors lit by bioluminescent fungi, monitored by AI constructs that no longer bore names but purposes. Children learned history not through textbooks but through echoes, visual imprints of those first settlers, projected on walls like ghosts that whispered legacy. Outside on the frozen surface, a small expedition team returned to base. Among them, Lyra, the youngest systems weaver, stood alone for a moment, her breath crystallizing in the air. She gazed toward the distant shimmer of Nyx's aurora, a swirling monument to survival. She raised a small transmitter from her suit and pressed it against a pillar of black ice. A tone pulsed, low, rhythmic, almost organic. Beneath her feet, a hum began to stir. They had waited 1,000 years, not for rescue, but for return. In the heart of the glacier, buried tech awakened. Metal shifted, light flickered in long-dead panels. The code etched into every alloyed surface began to unfold like a flower. Not Earth code, not Council code. Nyx code, forged in exile, birthed in frost, hungry. Back underground, Rhea watched the signal from Lyra's transmitter light up the central dome. She looked to the old council photograph framed in rusted steel on her wall. A memory of judgment, a sentence delivered. She touched it once, then turned away. "The stars are watching again," she said. The vessel, christened Vigilant Ash, was unlike anything the Galactic Council had ever permitted. Built not in defiance of physics, but in mastery of it. Its hull shimmered with refractive particles harvested from Nyx's auroras, and its core thrummed with a cold, alien energy. Something awakened in the planet's crust after centuries of mining. Lyra stood beneath its vast undercarriage, eyes closed, listening, not with ears, but through frequencies. "It's ready," she whispered, as if speaking to the ghost of the ship itself. Rhea Malik, now mostly machine, observed from the command platform, her breath visible in the cold. "How did we survive this long?" Lyra opened her eyes slowly, her voice a low murmur. "Because we weren't supposed to." Nyx was never a world built for survival. No breathable atmosphere, seismic instability, magnetic storms that could flay a person's mind if unshielded. No indigenous life. It was a sentence, a place meant to erase a species, but in its cruelty it became a crucible. Everything they'd built was forged in the knowledge that they were unwanted, unworthy in the eyes of the Council, genetically unstable, morally compromised, politically dangerous. Those were the reasons the Council gave before they sealed the hatch on the Peregrine. The last look from Counselor Sarek still burned in Rhea's memory. "You'll die out there," he'd said, "and no one will remember why." But they remembered. Oh, they remembered. Nyx's people grew in silence. Their myths were not of gods, but of betrayal. Children were taught the names of those who sentenced them. Their architecture bore designs encoded with ancient Earth languages, slowly evolving into something else, a fusion of function and vengeance. Vigilant Ash was their reply. Beneath the surface of the launch canyon, more structures stirred. Memory vaults, bioforges, crystalline minds that had dreamt in silence for generations now flickered with awakening. The final activation sequence had begun. "Will they recognize us?" asked Lyra, her voice distant. "No," Rhea replied, her voice grim. "And that's the point." On Nyx's highest ridge, 3 lights pierced the ashen sky, silent, synchronized, and ancient. They were the fail-safes, sentinels that had watched the stars for any sign of the Council's approach. But now their attention turned inward. The exile world wasn't simply surviving, it was evolving. And as Vigilant Ash rose, a storm gathered beneath it, one made not of water or dust, but pure electromagnetic fury, shaped by machines with memories and humans with vengeance in their blood. The galaxy had abandoned them. Now it would remember. The wind screamed across the ice plains as though mourning the lives lost to build the fragile existence now clinging to survival. Beneath the glacial crust, in a half-collapsed cavern of steel and ice, Commander Alara stood silently before a crystalline memorial wall. Embedded in the frozen structure were the names of the first 1,000, engineers, biologists, soldiers, parents, those who had died in the initial decades after exile. They had been buried not in graves, but in the foundation of what little civilization could rise in a world that had never wanted them. Her breath misted in front of her, hands clenched behind her back. Behind her, Lieutenant Rourke approached, slower than usual, his limp more pronounced after another frost-induced strain. "They're gathering in the hall," he said softly, eyes flicking to the memorial. "The vote's in 2 hours." Ilara didn't turn. "Do they understand what it costs to get this far? To even have a choice to return?" "They remember," Rourke replied, "but memory doesn't mean agreement." A soft chime sounded from the embedded communicator at her hip. Ilara tapped it. The voice that came through was faint, choppy through interference, but distinct. Command. This is the Perseus probe. Readings confirm. Council transmission patterns. Multiple FTL emissions detected. They're watching again. Ilara exhaled slowly. Thank you, Perseus. Keep tracking. She turned finally, her expression hardened by time and loss. They left us to rot, Rourke. Every breath we take on this world was bought with blood, and now they watch, wondering if their unwanted ghosts are crawling back to haunt them. We didn't just survive, Rourke said, stepping closer. We changed. The children born here. They see themselves not as victims of exile, but as the architects of a new humanity. Ilara nodded. And that's the problem. The Council won't let an evolved humanity stand on its own. They'll claim it's a mutation, a threat. They'll come back, just like we're preparing to do. Outside, the skies darkened unnaturally. A storm front approached, thick with crystalline ash, born from the planet's unstable atmosphere. It reminded Ilara of the day the first dome failed, when a quarter of their population perished in minutes. She walked slowly toward the hall, each step echoing on the steel floor with purpose. Inside, a large chamber had gathered the colony's leaders, scientists, warriors, archivists, descendants of the exiled. At the center was a single console, displaying a simple command. Exile protocol, reactivation, sequence ready. One by one, voices rose. Some pleaded for peace, others demanded vengeance. Ilara stepped forward and placed her palm on the console. This isn't about revenge, she said. It's about truth. We were cast into the void and told to die, but instead we evolved in silence. Now it's time to break that silence, not with war, but with proof that we were never meant to die here. That's what will terrify them the most. A soft chime confirmed her authorization. The Exile protocol began to hum with life, and far across the stars, hidden Council satellites blinked online, watching, waiting. The stars above Arcadia's broken horizon shimmered with unnatural clarity, too sharp, too still, as if they had held their breath for 1,000 years. From the observation spire atop the citadel, Ilara stood draped in a black thermal cloak, her eyes tracing the constellations that had once guided humanity's desperate descent to this forsaken world. But tonight, they weren't just symbols of navigation. They were a path home. Behind her, the Exile protocol's reactors pulsed low and deep through the Citadel's infrastructure. The core systems had awakened after a millennium of slumber, ancient technologies humming with precision. Data-laced tendrils of light spiraled up the walls around her, displaying old Earth dialects, Council encryption layers, and something new, something distinctly Arcadian. The silence humanity had kept for 10 centuries was not passive. It had been cultivated, weaponized, forged into something more enduring than vengeance. Patience. Lieutenant Rourke entered the spire chamber quietly. The relay array is aligned. Final pulse sync in 30 minutes. Ilara nodded without turning. Did we ever imagine we'd make it this far? Back when we were boiling ice for water in airlock drums? Rourke stepped beside her, gaze falling across the glittering stars. I imagined we'd either be dead or something unrecognizable by now. Looks like we're both. A soft beep sounded behind them. A holographic image flickered to life. An archive message from a long-dead founder. The woman's voice was cracked but defiant, recorded in the early decades after exile. To whomever sees this, know that we did not break. Know that we chose silence, not because we had nothing left to say, but because we were building something worth hearing. Ilara let the silence after that message hang. It wasn't emptiness. It was presence, the kind that only came from holding your voice until the moment it mattered most. Rourke pointed to the relay data streaming across the interface. Once we send this, it'll reach them within days. There's no way they can ignore a signal encoded with hybrid tech, gravity echoes, Arcadian pulse wave math. They'll know it's us. Ilara looked at him sharply. Let them know. Let them tremble. A technician's voice came through the comms. Commander, relay is fully charged. On your mark. She stepped forward, placed her palm on the final sequence control. Prepare to transmit. The room vibrated faintly as the vast communication lattice buried beneath Arcadia's surface awakened. Plasma relays spun, synthetic neurons aligned, and the Exile protocol's voice sharpened across the stars. Ilara took a breath. This is not a cry for help. This is not a declaration of war. This is our silence. Breaking. She pressed the panel. Above them, the sky split with a thin line of silver light, a burst of data folded in quantum origami, hurled through space and time. Somewhere, the Council would hear it, and somewhere deeper, they would remember what they chose to forget. The Galactic Council's core systems weren't designed to be surprised. Layers of quantum firewalls, prediction algorithms, and early warning grids scanned every corner of charted space. But the signal that arrived, sharp, encrypted in Arcadian mathematics and impossible energy harmonics, slipped past them all. It didn't knock. It didn't ask permission. It arrived. In the heart of the Council spire on Arx Caelus, alarms bloomed like red stars across control panels. Holographic screens spiraled open in the air as data analysts scrambled to interpret the source. It wasn't just a message. It was a signature, an identity. And what they found buried inside the waveform made the chamber fall silent. Origin, Arcadia system, one of the analysts whispered, pale and disbelieving. Protocol tag matches the Exile directive. It's them. At the head of the command dais, Chancellor Vinar stood rigid. His three hearts beat out of sync for the first time in decades. That's impossible. That colony was mathematically dead within 20 cycles. No resources, no viable atmosphere, no support. A younger aide turned toward him, swallowing hard. They didn't die, they adapted. Sir, the signal contains technological blueprints we don't understand. The physics are wrong. It's layered in some kind of consciousness-triggered encryption. The Chancellor narrowed his eyes. Play the message. The room dimmed as Ilara's voice, filtered through the Arcadian signal, echoed across the hall. Her tone was calm, her words few. To the Council, you exiled us to die. We didn't. We won't explain. We're coming. Prepare yourselves, not for vengeance, but consequence. Silence followed. It was heavier than fear. Within hours, probes dispatched to the Arcadia sector went dark. Not destroyed, just disconnected. As if the space around Arcadia itself had changed, had learned. And then, without warning, the first Arcadian vessel appeared in the skies above the Council's capital moon. It didn't descend. It didn't hail. It hovered. A colossal obsidian shape rimmed with pale blue light. Completely silent, surrounded by gravity distortions that bent light and made sensors glitch. No propulsion signature, no identifiable material composition, just presence. Military fleets scrambled. Shields were raised, but nothing happened. No attack, no threat, just arrival. Back on Arcadia, Ilara watched through the ship's forward observation window, arms folded, silent. Around her, the Arcadian leadership stood in quiet formation, dressed not in uniforms, but in matte cloaks of woven memory fiber, encoded with the names of the dead. We're here, Rourke said beside her. What now? Ilara didn't blink. Now, we listen to what silence does when it's louder than fear. The Arcadians had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Council's heart was still racing, but their attempts at communication remained futile. No one dared to speak, yet the air in the chamber crackled with an unbearable weight. The image of the ship, the dark, hovering behemoth, lingered in every mind. It was not merely a ship, it was a declaration, a reminder of something the galaxy had long since forgotten, the will of those they had abandoned. On the observation deck, Ilara stood alone. The once rebellious leader of the Arcadian colonists now held an unsettling calm in her posture. Her fingers brushed over the smooth surface of the ship's control panel, the interface not something crafted by advanced technology, but something alive. It pulsated, as if aware of her touch. A soft hum emanated from the ship, vibrating through the floor beneath her. The screen in front of her came alive, and a series of images flickered. Faces. Faces of those who had died on Arcadia, those whose bodies had been ravaged by the planet's hostile conditions. Faces that once held terror and pain, but now burned with something else. Memory. The faces shifted, blurred, and then, in an instant, they focused. There was no mistaking it. The eyes of those who had been left behind were staring back at her. They were alive, not in the physical sense, but in a way that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. "Do you see them?" Rourke's voice was quiet, almost reverent as he joined her, his eyes focused on the images. "They are still here," Alara whispered, her voice betraying the emotion she had long kept buried. "I thought we'd lost them, but we never did. The memories, they live on inside us." One face in particular stood out, an older man with silver hair, his features worn but strong, eyes as fierce as the storms that ravaged Arcadia's surface. Ilara's father. The images flickered again, and her father's eyes burned through the screen, not with anger, but with a longing, a deep, unshakable sorrow. And then he spoke, though his lips did not move. "We remember. You left us to die, but we never ceased to exist." His voice filled the chamber, not from the speakers, but from within the very walls. It was not a physical voice. It was the voice of a collective consciousness, of a people who had transcended death itself. Rourke stiffened at the words, his eyes wide with shock. "What? What are they?" "They're the echo of our people. We were more than just survivors. We became something else, something beyond the limitations of flesh," Ilara replied, her eyes never leaving the screen. Her father's face lingered for a moment longer before fading away, but his presence remained. There was no question now. The Arcadians had been transformed. What the galaxy had thought was a death sentence had turned into a rebirth. They had become something more. But Alara knew this was only the beginning. What they had become, what they had awakened, would soon challenge everything the galaxy knew about power, existence, and the will to survive. "The Council won't understand," Rourke said, turning to face her. "What do we do now?" Ilara's gaze hardened, her mind already set. "We show them. We remind them that silence can be more deadly than war." And with that, she turned away from the screen, her resolve as unshakable as the memory of those who had been lost, but never truly forgotten. The ship's hull reverberated with the low hum of its ancient systems coming to life. Ilara stood before the control panel, her hands steady despite the weight of the decision she had just made. The images of those lost in the cold embrace of Arcadia's unforgiving world still haunted her thoughts. But now, there was no fear in her heart, only resolve. Time had become their greatest weapon. Rourke's footsteps echoed as he approached her, his eyes dark with unspoken questions. "Ilara, do you think the Council will see us as something we were not? We were sent out here to die. And yet, we are alive," Ilara replied, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "We are not what they expected. We never were. The Council underestimated us, and now they will pay for it." Behind them, the vast, eerie expanse of space stretched endlessly. The planet's frozen surface, the place they once called home, lay far below, silent, empty, and yet they had not truly left. What they had become in the 1,000 years since their exile was more powerful than anyone could have predicted. Rourke studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "So, this ship, it's more than just a ship, isn't it?" Alara nodded, her gaze fixed on the darkened screen in front of her, where flickers of data began to emerge. "It's an archive, a vault of everything we've become since that fateful day." What the Council didn't understand was that exile wasn't just about keeping us away from the galaxy. It was about stripping us of everything that made us human. "But we survived," Rourke added softly. "Yes," Ilara said, her tone hardening. "We survived by becoming something else. Time was our weapon. We adapted, we learned. And in that time, we shed our human limitations. Our minds, our spirits, they transcended the physical. The planet, it became the cradle of our rebirth." The control panel in front of them flickered to life, and a series of holographic images projected into the air. The faces of her people, their features shifting and morphing as though they were composed of light and shadow, yet unmistakably human. But there was something more now, a presence that radiated from them. The echoes of Arcadia's past had found a form, and that form was more powerful than anything the Council had ever imagined. We became the land, Alara continued, almost as if speaking to herself. We became the storms, the winds, the fires. We were not bound by flesh. The planet became our vessel, our memory. We are as old as the land, as timeless as the stars. Rourke took a slow step back, his expression a mixture of awe and fear. And now you want to use that power against them? They left us to die, Ilara said, her voice growing cold. But we never died. We endured. And now we will show the galaxy what happens when you abandon the will to survive. The Council cannot erase us. Time has been our ally, and it will be their enemy. The room grew still as the ship's engines roared to life, a deep, resonant hum that echoed through the ship's corridors. The power of 1,000 years of silence, of waiting, was building. Ilara felt it deep within her bones, a pulse of energy that matched the rhythm of her heart. "We've been patient," she murmured, her gaze locked on the planet below. But the weapon was never time. It was us. With that, the ship's systems powered up fully, and a pulse of raw energy shot through the vessel. The journey they had begun long ago had finally come full circle. The stars bent into long, silent streaks as Alara's fleet burst into Council space. No hails, no declarations, no warning, just arrival, absolute and undeniable. The once bustling orbital lanes around the core world of Selenox now hung frozen with disbelief. The ships that emerged weren't sleek or elegant like the Council's war vessels. They were brutal, angular, and alive, veined with bioalloys and humming with energy that defied classification. On the bridge of the Vigilant Exile, Ilara stood at the command altar, cloaked in silence. The light from the planet below cast a cold reflection in her eyes. Behind her, Rourke monitored the Council's defense grid, his hands hovering over the interface like a surgeon preparing for a precise incision. "They still haven't hailed," he murmured. "They won't," Ilara replied. "They're trying to understand how we got here." Selenox's surface shimmered with blue-gold shields, its defense stations rotating into position. Fleets scrambled from hangars, sleek warships forming ranks. Even now, after a millennium, the Council thought in conventional terms: formation, deterrence, diplomacy. But Ilara's people had long since abandoned those rules. "No warnings," was she ordered. "We don't speak their language anymore." And with that, the exiles began. The Vigilant Exile unleashed its will, a beam of twisted energy older than any Council science, pulsing with the memory of Arcadia's burning soil and the frozen sacrifice of generations. It carved through one of the defense rings in silence, the explosion oddly graceful, like a blossom unfolding in the void. The other exile ships followed, no synchronized salvos, no tactics by Council standards, just overwhelming presence, an organic swarm moving with one shared memory of betrayal. Down on Selenox, panic erupted. Civilians ran through glass halls and under shimmering sky domes as alarms echoed. High Command scrambled to organize a response, but their encrypted frequencies were flooded with ghost signals, unreadable, dissonant pulses that caused even machines to shudder. In the war chamber of the Council citadel, Chancellor Vial stood rigid, staring at the hollow projection of the attacking fleet. "These signatures," an aide stammered, they shouldn't exist. Some of them are centuries old. Others don't match anything." "They're not asking for negotiation," another whispered. Vale's jaw tightened. "Because they don't want anything." Back aboard the Vigilant, Ilara watched their forces surge forward, not with rage but with inevitability. They weren't here for demands. They weren't here to be heard. Their very presence was the answer to 1,000 years of exile. She pressed a hand to the living console and whispered, "Let them feel what silence becomes when it survives." Rourke turned from the interface, his voice grim. "If they ask to surrender?" Ilara didn't hesitate. "They had their time. This is ours." As another Council cruiser fell in burning silence, the message became clear. No demands, no negotiations, no mercy. Only the return of the forgotten. Selenox burned, not in fire, but in fear. The skies above the council's throne world were no longer blue. Ash-gray clouds, born from shattered orbital platforms and smoldering wreckage, choked the upper atmosphere. Glowing embers of what had once been symbols of supremacy now drifted down like judgment. Inside the council citadel's fractured command chamber, Chancellor Vial stood among silence and ruin. Half the walls had collapsed, crushed by shock waves. Screens flickered with static, and the bodies of his advisors lay scattered among shards of shattered governance. The room, once the heart of a thousand-year empire, felt like a tomb. Above him, the projection of the Exile fleet still loomed, unwavering, unmoved by pleas or strategy. They weren't here for conquest. They weren't here to rule. They were here to make the council remember. Val clutched a data chip in his trembling hand. It contained the last unredacted records of Operation Dimming Light, the vote, the exile, the calculated abandonment of the colonists on Arcadia. It had all been deemed necessary then, a minor sacrifice for the stability of the galaxy. He had been young, ambitious, eager to protect order, but the children they'd cast out into the void had not died. They had grown in silence, their pain fusing with purpose, and now they returned not to speak, but to show the cost of betrayal. In orbit, aboard the vigilant Exile, Ilara stood on the edge of decision. Their primary objective had been met. The Council's military capacity was broken. But what came next was not revenge. It was reckoning. Rourke approached her, his voice quieter than usual. Some ships are broadcasting civilian distress signals. Families. Evacuation vessels. Ilara stared through the view pane at the battered planet, her face hard but her eyes distant. The ghosts of Arcadia, her ancestors, her mentors, the generations lost to frost and fire, seemed to hover around her like silent witnesses. If we become what they feared, we lose everything we built, she said softly. This was never about annihilation. Rourke nodded. Then what is justice? Her response was a whisper, memory. She gave the order. Their weapons powered down. Their ships reformed into a sphere of light above the planet, broadcasting not words but images. Memories of the exile, of children born in ice, of cities carved from asteroid bones, of music composed in vacuum domes, of loss, of endurance, of return. On Selenox, people fell to their knees, not from command, not from submission, but from understanding. In the end, the exiles did not take territory, or captives, or thrones. They took the silence, and they left it behind, inside every council survivor, etched deeper than any scar. This was the price of betrayal, and in their wake, the exiles vanished again. Not defeated, not victorious, but remembered.